Aloha, and welcome back to the seventh episode of Talk Story with House Majority. My name is Della Au Belatti, and I serve as the House Majority Leader for the state of Hawaii's 30th legislature. To our viewers, thank you so much for joining us each week. The legislature reconvened on Monday, and we are hard at work taking up legislation to address the pandemic, reinforce the social safety net, and rebuild and bring back our economy. Last week, inter-island travel without the 14-day quarantine was lifted for residents, and there's lots of talk on what's in store for inbound travel to Hawaii. Today, I am joined by Tim Sakahara, Department of Transportation Public Information Officer, who is helping us all stay informed on the latest with transportation and travel during COVID-19. We'll be talking about the reopening of inter-island travel and safe travel measures being put in place at airports. Later, we'll watch a segment featuring the University of Hawaii Department of Health Contact Tracing Program, another critical public health response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Be sure to place your questions on the live stream featured on facebook.com/Olelo Community. So at this time, I'd like to welcome Tim Sakahara to Talk Story with House Majority. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here.
You've been so great about educating the community about what to expect at the airport. So I kind of wanted to take you a little bit back in time. Travel came to a virtual standstill with the governor instituting the state's 14-day quarantine and stay-at-home orders. Can you describe the state of travel in Hawaii during those first months?
Yeah, the one word to describe it was almost like eerie, because you had, in general, last year at this time, about 58,000 people coming into the airport and coming and going into the airport alone, right? That's just in Honolulu every single day. And it came down to a few hundred a day this year. And so the travel numbers dropped by 99% from the year compared to last year. Now in June, the numbers have come up a little bit and people may take notice of that, but we're still 96% below where we were this time last June. So it is a whole different world in transportation. I've walked from Terminal 1 over to Terminal 2 at various times in the afternoon, and I haven't seen a single passenger, which is just amazing to think about. So yeah, the state of travel and transportation in Hawaii is certainly turned on its head at this point.
Who are these travelers, especially in these interim months? Who are these people traveling, and what kind of flights were we seeing?
Well, prior to the inter-island travel opening up, it was a lot of essential workers, people who had to travel for their work. There were still military people coming and going. And then you did have some people who either came in and didn't know about the quarantine, and in some of those cases, they flew right back on the next flight. Or people who were just trying to, I talked with people at the airport. There were millions of people on the mainland are unemployed and they weren't able to pay their rent. So early on, a lot of people were coming home to live with their parents and things. They weren't necessarily considered residents because their ID was a mainland ID, but they grew up here and their parents live here. And because they're unemployed, they're writing it out back at home. I mean, and had to move home with their parents. So that was a large group as well that came in before. Now, since June 16th, since the inter-island travel quarantine has opened up, there are more inter-island passengers flying back and forth, go see those relatives and family, even maybe a staycation here and there. So that is since June 16th and contributed to some of the inter-island numbers.
So when the 14-day quarantine was imposed, what were some of the steps and systems that the DOT staff had to think through when the 14-day quarantine was imposed?
A lot, basically. It was no small task, and it was very difficult. And a lot of state employees had to start doing things that was, quite frankly, not in their position description. I mean, no one does it say passenger verification in any of their job titles, but a lot of people had to go and get shifted. And there was a lot of work with not just DOT, but other agencies as well, on the state level, on the county levels, the law enforcement agencies, the private sector, and the airlines. So a lot of people had to work very collaboratively together to make this all happen. Now, that being said, it is a constant evolution of the process. The forms, since we started on March 26th till now, have changed literally dozens of times because of all the revisions and adaptations that have had to been made. And so And almost every flight comes in, there's at least one passenger, one person where you get a new question. And is this an exception? Is this an exception? What do we do about this case? So it has been very difficult, but I will say the teams at the airport, and I've watched it and helped many times. They're doing a great job. They are, I consider, frontline workers as well. And because they're face to face with all these travelers coming in, and they're doing a very patient and doing a very good job ensuring all that passenger information in those forms are correct and accurate.
And that's only for a sliver of what we expect will come back, right? I mean, they're dealing with only just a small number of travelers at this point in time, like you said. So what were some of the thinking that had to go in when, so, you had to do all this stuff when the 14-day quarantine was imposed, but now with the 14-day quarantine lifting, what were the whole new set of challenges that you folks had to think through?
Well, for the inter-island process, a lot of things changed as well. Mainly, the biggest thing was the form itself. Everybody who is arriving into the state or departing inter-island previously to June 16th had to fill out a mandatory travel declaration form. Now, the inter-island passengers have filled out a new form, a travel and health-related form. So it is different, and the process is similar, but it does add increased steps. And so the way that works is people should check in with their airline in advance if they can. When they show up at the airport, get their boarding pass, go drop off any checked luggage they have. Then they're going to proceed over to the TSA checkpoint area. But before they go to the checkpoint, they're first going to have their temperature taken by a member of the Hawaii National Guard. And then if they don't have a temperature of 100.4 degrees or higher, they're going to go on to see our airport representative who's going to collect the form, ensure it's accurate. They're going to call the person's cell phone that they listed and make sure it rings right in front of them. They're going to make sure their address that they listed matches up with their government ID. And then they're going to go through those questions and decide if that person needs an additional medical assessment. After all that is done, then they go through the TSA checkpoint and proceed to their gate and go on their inter-island flight.
Now, was there a little piece, if they need further assessment, what happens at that point? What if they need a test?
Correct. So the two main things, primary things that will prevent someone from flying inter-island right now is if they have a temperature over 100.4 degrees, or if they just refuse to fill out the form completely and accurately, they won't be allowed to fly. In addition, there are health questions on there. So if people say yes, that they do have a new cough or a sore throat or have been experiencing chills or any of those health symptoms, it doesn't necessarily mean they won't be able to fly, but they will be pulled aside and have an additional assessment taken. One, they're gonna confirm if they do have a temperature or not. Two, they're gonna talk with them about their symptoms, and then they're gonna offer them the opportunity to have that nasal swab taken right there at the airport. And that will be the sample collected to test for COVID. Now, that sample will then be taken to a DOH laboratory offsite. So it's not actually tested at the airport, but it is tested at one of the DOH labs in the state. And then usually that test result will come back in 24 to 48 hours to let them know if they're positive. And the reason why all that contact information and ensuring it's accurate is important, because if it does come back positive, the Department of Health needs to know how to get in touch with that person and then implement all that contact tracing and other additional precautions.
Okay, a thought just came to me. If they get a test and it takes 24 hours, then the person is actually released and then allowed to go to their residence, but then they're asked to stay and quarantine at home. Is that correct?
Correct. As long as they don't have a fever. That's if they said yes to the symptoms but do not have a fever. Because you could have a lot of various symptoms but not have COVID. So the thought is to tell them, okay, you don't have a fever, you do have symptoms, we're going to allow you to fly, but yes, you should take precautions, use the PPE, and quarantine until you get that test result back.
Got it. And then in terms of like holding a person, if they both have the temperature and then you've done the nasal screen or the nasal swab, does the airports ever hold on to a person?
Well, no, only if they become belligerent or combative and things like that. But once they have a temperature or they've been deemed like they are not allowed to fly, they will typically leave the airport. They're told to go home, take care of themselves, see the doctor if necessary. And so that's usually what happens in those scenarios.
Okay. Now, thermal screening is really a piece that's important at the airport. So, what is the plan for thermal screening and the use of facial recognition technology at the airports, as that's been getting a lot of, um, you know, focus
A lot of
recently?
attention, yes, indeed. And I think what people hear thermal screening and facial recognition technology, and all of a sudden their mind starts to wander and think the worst. And really, thermal screening is just another temperature check. It's just taking the person's temperature. And in facial recognition technology, in this case, people should not think spy movie technology or anything like that. It's nothing like that at all. All it would be doing is taking a picture of a person who is found to have a temperature over that 100.4 degree threshold. If that happens, it's only to be able to kind of track that person from camera to camera so that an employee at the airport can pull them aside and then provide that medical assessment, really get there and then talk with them about their symptoms, confirm that they do have a fever, and then take those necessary precautions. Anyone coming through the airport that would walk through this technology who doesn't have a temperature of 100.4 or is 100.4 or below, their picture would never be taken and wouldn't be done. And even of those that, if it is taken, if you do have a fever, say Rep Belatti walks through, has a fever, has 101 fever, the picture would be taken, but we would not know your name, where you live. We certainly wouldn't know any personal data like your social security number, but it also would not know if you have any criminal warrants out for your arrest or your criminal history. Any of that data like that is not going to be known. And even at that, this picture would not be shared with any outside agencies, and it would be purged or erased in about 30 minutes after it's taken.
Okay, so there's a lot of privacy protections already built into the systems that you folks are kind of looking at right now, correct? Is what you just basically.
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of it, right? I mean, so we wouldn't know any of this personal information on the person at all. It wouldn't be shared. It's really just taking a picture of that person in the moment when the thermal temperature scanner detected that this person had a fever. And I should say too that since we've started taking everybody's temperature in early April, there's been very, very few people that have actually come through the airport with the temperature. About 24 people statewide have come through the temperature. So it actually doesn't really impact very many people at all. As far as the temperature, the picture taking, and that's if this technology is going. I should say there's a demonstration with the companies happening right now. It started last week. It's this week. It's not going in full practice. It's not scanning passengers as we speak. It's just demonstrations so that the state leadership can see this technology and equipment in action in real time in a demonstration. And what they've been doing is one of the people who works for the company will go and put a hairdryer on their forehead to make it really hot, and then they'll walk by and see how it triggers and processes that person.
They're using one of the companies is testing their technology here at the state capitol. So we really are taking a look at what's going to work best for Hawaii, particularly the airports. And, I have a comment rolling in through one of our channels. They're asking about staff shortages. So where does this technology play in with the staffing that's going to be needed?
Well, that's a huge factor, and it's anticipated that using the facial recognition technology will save a lot of money and reduce the need for a lot more employees. Without the facial recognition technology, basically what you would have to do is have an employee or human being stationed at every single camera all the time that it's in use. So we're talking about dozens of cameras all over just the airport in Honolulu, and then throughout the day and night. So you're talking about a lot of people and millions of dollars over the year in cost. Whereas the facial recognition technology, theoretically, we anticipate it would just be a person sitting in a control room looking at a bunch of monitors and able to track that person as they walk through the airport. And then once they get to a certain section of the corridor, that's when you have an employee pull them aside and start that additional assessment. So the at least idea going into this demonstration is that using this technology, it shouldn't be necessarily a scary thing, but it is something that could be a tool to help save resources and save funds.
Thank you. And then one more question rolling in was, what other states are you using as, what are you looking at for planning purposes?
Well, Alaska is the main one that the state DOT here in Hawaii is working with, communicating with very frequently, and they have implemented a very good program, which we're planning and talking with, seeing what we can mimic and use, and looking at seeing what works. There is a lot of pre-testing. There's a lot of testing at the airport as well. There's certainly a lot of coordination with their Department of Health, which is leading their charge. And so the coordination with a lot of different agencies, both in the state and out, are big factors in all of this.
So we're running out of time, Tim. We're going to have you come back because I know that travel is going to be on people's minds. I want to thank you for coming on this episode of Talk Story with House Majority. Sorry I can't let you leave with any final thoughts, but we will have you back. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.